Wasn't like fussing, just excited. All right, guys. Excited about today's lecture. We're going to get into some really neat illusionary things, but when I say illusion, it doesn't necessarily mean it's hard. It just means it's neat. It's different. Okay. So just as a reminder, so far we have ankle, uniaxial hinge, dorsal subtalar, non-axial gliding, but the sum of all those glides are mostly frontal. Inversion, eversion. I'm not going to ask a plane or an axis on the subtalar. Knee, modified hinge. I'm not holding you accountable to the Latin gingolimus, just modified hinge, meaning it's mostly hinge in the sagittal. But when we bend it and we flex, remember I was telling you last class about these collateral ligaments? You see how they go on slack? And you can, some knee rotation. Okay. We're going to go into more today with hip. And then our hip is triaxial ball and socket. It's not the same joint as the shoulder, but it's the same classification as the shoulder. It's just the hip has a bigger socket, but the shoulder still has a socket. It's like if a golf ball was on a golf tee, the tee is still a socket. It's just not a very big socket. So a triaxial ball and socket. We already have the sagittal. I did that on exam 1. I introduced you to the transverse. And today, we're going to delve into more transverse stuff, and then I'm going to give you the frontal. I'm going to teach you how to see it and not fall for the global traps that our brains have for us. Okay? First thing I want to start off with today is these long bones that you have in the bottom. They can't, even though they have, like the femur has a polar axis in an anatomical position, the poles run through here. The ankle doesn't want to rotate about the polar axis. Remember, that'd be a bad day. It wants to do this, but it doesn't want to do this. The knee in anatomical position does not want to rotate about the polar axis, but the hip does. Okay, that should make sense. We only want kind of one thing at a time. If we had multiple joints, if this femur could rotate both about the tibia and the socket, that would be like riding roller skates on a skateboard. Like that would be something that can move, moving on something else that can move. That'd be pretty tough. It makes sense that we kind of want something anchored on one end and something movable on the other. What happens when the knee bends? That's what I was going to tell Grace earlier in Emma about this new analogy I'm going to try. In anatomical position, your polar axis runs through both your hip and your knee. Your hip has access to transverse rotation about the femur, external, internal, external. But something neat happens when we bend our knee. When we bend our knee, our tibia's polar axis is not in line with our femur's polar axis. What I mean by that is the tibia's polar axis is where we're going to have the knee rotation. And that polar axis happens to run through the distal femur, but not longitudinally over the top. Because the femur's polar axis, we do not want the femur to do this in the knee. That would be a bad day. Right? We don't want the femur to rotate about its polar axis when the knee is bent. Does that make sense? We got this. So the knee's polar axis when the knee is bent is here, almost kind of like on top of the patella through the tibia. And when we have open chain, it's going to look like this. But when we have closed chain, it's going to look like that. Does that make sense? We do not want the femur doing this. Now, the femur does, if you go back to my scissor analogy, femur's polar axis is still there, but that's for the hip. It's for hip rotation. Does that make sense? So, when our knee is flexed, we can have internal and external knee rotation. We could also have subtalar and ankle stuff, but if I'm asking about the knee, we don't care about that kind of stuff happening. It's not that I'm disrespecting the ankle and the subtalar. It's just if I want to have a knee conversation, I'm gonna have a knee conversation. Hip rotation when my knee is flexed and my hip is flexed looks like this. Femurs longitudinal, the femurs polar. This is the hip's transverse plane for rotation, meaning anatomical position, external, internal. The knee has nothing to do with my hip. Knee flex, external, internal. It's doing the same thing. My hip. Try that again. Love the sound effects. I mean, I've been working my whole life. External, internal of the hip. External, internal of the hip. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. External. Okay, well, your foot came in. So, that's still external rotation, lateral rotation, internal rotation. Getting old, so I'm going to try to balance. External or lateral, internal or medial. Does that make sense? So we can't look at the feet. One of the reasons that's an illusion for us is because our elbows flex anteriorly. So when we internally and rotate, like John Cena, the hand does follow the rotation. But because our knee posteriorly flexes, it doesn't. They got it like this. For a rotating body, this pipe is spinning the same way. You see it as counterclockwise. Now you see it as clockwise. When I'm spinning it clockwise, this side is going up while the other side is going down, but it's still spinning the same way. This side is going left, this side is going right, but it's still spinning the same way. Now, imagine my hip and my knee spinning the same way. Both of them internal. Both of them external. But if all we do is look at hand go in, hand go out, foot go in, foot go out, we're going to miss it. Does that make sense? So when we do something like, I'm telling you, this is going to be on the test. This is going to be on the test. Write it down. Write it down. I watched the video. When you cross your leg, your instinct is to want to say internal rotation. But can everybody see if I had a flag? Y'all remember Talladega Nights? Ricky Bobby stabbed himself. Look, here's my flag. When my knee is extended, we all agree this is lateral or external, and this is medial or internal. So why does it matter if my knee is bent? This is still lateral or external, and this is still medial and internal. So if I cross my leg, that's lateral or external rotation. Does that make sense? And uncrossing my leg would be internal. Everybody get that? Because it's not about my lower leg. That doesn't make my hip joint. The femur and the acetabulum make my hip joint. How's the femur spinning? Hey, left hip spin laterally. Hey, left hip spin externally. Hey, right hip spin laterally. Hey, right hip spin externally. Make sense? All right. Now the hard part. It's not hard. We're going to get it. How many of you, we're going to go to the frontal plane. And we're going to practice. How many of you have ever heard or been introduced to ab and adduction? You've heard that before. How many of you have ever been introduced to abduction is away from the midline? Okay. Scrap that. Scrap that. It can be, but it doesn't have to always be. And that's why I want you to rethink of it the way I'm going to teach it to you. First example I'm going to give, I'll tell you that the shoulders and the hip are the same class of joint. Obviously, your hips don't have as much movement as your shoulders, so we got to protect down here. We got to move up here. But if I have shoulder abduction and I use the midline word, okay, I'm going away. But if I keep going, eventually I got to come back. And that's the same rotation. That's the same spin. If we did a midline concept, then this would be the same motion. They both came in the middle. So I try to use these silly examples because I think that kind of allows us to erase our Etch-a-Sketch and start all over. If we did midline, this would be the same as this, would be the same as this, would be the same as it would all be the same. So trust me, I think this is the easiest way to start off. If I know that flexion gets me into fetal, that was a pretty easy way to avoid angles and just, am I getting more into fetal, am I getting away? When you think about it, transverse plane, that's not going to get me in the fetal. Spinning. But I can get into fetal sagittally, but I could also kind of get into fetal frontally. Just saying. I could take a different road to get into a fetal position. Does that make sense? Some people refer to it as lateral flexion. Us biomechanists, we like to keep things consistent. So if flexion is reserved for sagittal, we needed another name for lateral flexion. Abduction. So one way to start off by looking at ab and adduction is it getting me closer to lateral flexion or closer to fetal in the frontal plane? Or is it getting me further away from fetal in the frontal plane? So far, so good? Okay. Also, we talked about this mirror effect, where if I had a clock and I had a mirror, if I did this, the mirror would do this, and the mirror would be pointing to 9 o'clock because it's a reflection. So here's how I want you to look at it. I don't want you to look at it as away or towards the midline, because we can actually adduct our hip and adduct our shoulder from anatomical position. In other words, we can go away from the midline, both and add. Just like I can have flexion from, and I can have extension to. I can have abduction from, and I can have adduction from. I can have ab to, and I can have ab from. It's hard to show with the shoulders because the trunk gets in the way, but the hips, I could have adduction from. Especially when we get into pelvic girdle rotations, you're going to see a lot of adduction. So here's how I want you to think about it. Using the clock as an example. We know our joints can't rotate like a clock, meaning we only have so much motion, but we got to stop and go the other way. So how I'd like for you to look at it is the hip, the right hip, because we're going to do a mirror effect. But we're used to a standard clockwise clock. So I'm giving you this analogy from the right hip so that the numbers line up. Your range of motion for your hip Obviously, 12 o'clock, that's not going to happen. Okay. But lateral flexion or abduction is trying to get me into more of a fetal position, just in the frontal plane. Adduction then would be getting me further away from lateral flexion or abduction in the frontal plane. Now, the full range of motion is like further away. If I go from 6 to 5, I'm not getting closer to 12 because I can't keep going that way. That's the thing I'm trying to get you to see. That my hip can't keep spinning this way to go all the way around. So from 6 to 5 actually got me further away from being laterally flexed. Just like extension from anatomical got me further away from being flexed, being in fetal. It's the same concept. So if I start here and I have right hip, and Campbell, why are you saying it like you're trying to auction off? I would get it, he would go net, he would get 15, he would go 50. Oh crap, I shouldn't probably do that one. Because whoever named ab and adduction were evil people. Not literally. But think about it, they sound so close. Abduction, adduction. When I was growing up, I had twins that I graduated with, looked nothing alike, but their names were Heath and Keith. And so, hey Heath, no, I'm Keith. Hey Keith, I mean, yeah, gosh. They look nothing alike, but their names were so similar. I mean, obviously, took 18 years, but figured it out. So I'm telling you, flexion, extension, internal, external, medial, lateral, ab, ad. So I'm going to emphasize things like AB, AD, ab, and that's why. Because they sound so close. It's easy to get confused. Okay? So here we go. Left hip. Again, a mirror effect. If my right hip does this, the mirrored image would be here. Right hip ab, right hip add, right hip ab from, left hip add to. Left hip ab from, left hip add to. But I can have left hip add from. I had a little bit of flexion, but that's only to clear my legs so that I could continue to adduct. Gets in the way, right? It's like if you adducted your shoulders and you're like, oh, my trunk's in the way. No problem. That's how I used to do it. My boy used to be able to do that good. But something's in the way. So I got to flex a little bit, but I can go through. But I don't want you to look at it as going away from the middle. Because this is going away from bilateral. Illusion time. In all of those examples of hip motion, we move the feet about the acetate in the socket. How many bones make this up? Remember from anatomy? 3. That's the fuse, the synarthrotic articulation of the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. So technically, 4 bones make up the hip. Okay. So this is what we did so far. Flexion, extension, ab, add, external, internal. Here's what you've had so far for the illusions. That's why I love introducing you to illusions first. You've had flexion, extension. In last class, I introduced you to external and internal. You with me so far? And right now we're going to look at add and add. Gotta stand up. All around. Praise. You guys flow. You got to feel it. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. Hands at your hips. Okay. Feet, I'd say a little bit spaced out, not too crazy, but shoulder width. Okay. But I'd like you to keep both feet on the ground and take your pelvis, take your hips, and do this with it. I'm gonna line up with you. This. You should feel a stretch on the inside of your right hip. And you might feel a stretch on the outside of your left hip. Maybe. I would like for us to identify the motions that happen at our right and our left hips when we took our pelvis, our sockets, and did this with it. And eventually, next week, I'm going to teach you what that motion is called in the pelvis. But we need to identify hip motion. Okay? Give it some thought. Talk amongst your group, and Grace and Emma are going to float around if you have any questions. In other words, making sure they're doing the right hip motions. Okay? Go. Also, we do not assume that they did the same thing. That's important. Just because our pelvis did one thing, we don't assume that both of our hips did the same thing. Like the windshield wipers, right? Okay, let's really take a few minutes to give this some thought. We're here, and we're meeting this. Start, finish. Good stuff. All right, you guys. I use stick figures. So the answer was, you remember what type of? I got to put them on the spot. We're going to talk about the pelvic girdle soon. For left hip, add. Right hip, add. If I was a Gryffindor, I can magically float myself, reposition my legs, and you would see my hips like this relative to my sockets. Or we will be Gryffindors. Sorry, Slytherins. And I want you to go left ear, left shoulder. And I want you to look at this stick figure as if this was the ground. And notice how the hips are positioned. You see it? Left ear, left shoulder. Look how the right hip is abducted and the left hip is adducted. This would be anatomical. This would be anatomical. You see it? Okay. See if you can figure this one out. Instead of making you get up, if you want to, you're more than happy. Okay. I'm standing on just my right leg, and I do this. I hike up my left hip. the left side of my pelvis comes up. I want you to be able to tell me what motion happened on my right side. Motion at the right hip. Oh, you're great. Standing on the right leg, lift the left side up. And I want you to tell me what motion had to happen on my right hip. See it? Right hip, AB or AD? AB, good. Right hip abduction. We've had these illusions of all we're doing is just taking it here, frontal plane. To get this side up, I got to move that down. Okay. Right, how about this one? Standing on my left leg, and instead of hiking my right hip up, I'm going to drop it down. It's not hot. What I'm doing, without you realizing it yet, is that's how we walk. Our hips internally and externally rotate and flex and extend and ab and adduct. So I'm introducing you to some of these exaggerated hip motions. But that's how we move. Okay. From here to there, left hip adduction. Let's see where we are time before we get to this far. All right. We're going to do the variations. We're going to do the horizontals. Okay. Ball and socket joints have the most movement in the body. It's important to know that in anatomical position, you have ab and ad, you have flexion extension, you have internal and external rotation. Okay. From anatomical. Flexions, extensions, ab and adductions. It's like, let's see how I can put it. When we were in elementary school, maybe it's when I was in elementary school, I used to think I was so smart in elementary school because it was like, which of the following don't belong? And I'm like, I don't do this. Apple, banana, strawberry, sledgehammer, Thought I was so smart. And then reading and writing came about. I don't know how to catch it up. Which one doesn't belong? Which one doesn't belong? Frontal, sagittal, transverse. Which one looks different? Absolutely. Absolutely. Which one looks different? All day. Good. Because of that, we have to set, and I'm going to explain, sagittal and frontal planes and axes are going to be from the sockets, the proximal segments perspective. I'm going to explain what that means. Flexion and extension in the fetal and not a fetal isn't from the femur's perspective. It's from the socket's perspective. So that way, I don't say this is flexion, but if I externally rotate, that's flexion. Flexion, flexion. I just externally rotate it first. Now, don't feel sorry for the femur or the humerus. They have the transverse plane perspective. So that we can have external and internal, and external and internal, and external and internal. I'm going to give you a practical example of why we have to do this for the triaxial joints, the most movable joints. In anatomical position, I can ab and add, I can flex, extend, I can internal and external rotate. However, if I'm abducted, I can neither flex nor extend. If I'm flexed, I can neither ab or adduct. But yet, I can still move in 3 planes. So we have a variation of ab and adduction in the trunk, or in this case, the pelvis's transverse plane. That's why it's important to know perspectives. Think of it like this. When we're in anatomical position and our clock is like this, we have regular ab and ad. But sometimes our hips can be flexed and our clock, this is my femur, the clock can be here. And now I can't ab and adduct in my frontal plane. But I can ab and adduct in the transverse plane of my pelvis. We call that horizontal abduction and horizontal adduction. Does that make sense? Horizon, transverse of my pelvis. Now, it gets you to the similar place. What I mean by that is left hip flexion, left hip extension, back home. Left hip flexion, horizontal abduction, and then adduction, regular. So in other words, if I'm abducted, I can take a transverse plane horizontally or a frontal plane to basically bring it back to 6 o'clock, whether my clock is here or whether my clock is there. Has anybody ever heard the term horizontal ab and adduction? So is it a separate joint motion? Yeah. But is it just a variation of regular ab and adduction? Because you can't ab and adduct from here, but you can horizontally ab and adduct from here. You can't flex and extend from here, but you can ab and add, horizontally ab and add, and internally extend. So you'll always have 6 ways to go. We have to have 6 ways to move. But it should make sense that I can't flex or extend from here, so we got to call it something. I can't ab and adduct from here, so I have to call it something. Make sense? Okay. So at your desk, it doesn't have to be big, but if you had your knees together and you just simply did this, that would be horizontal abduction. Horizontal abduction. What I'm trying to get us to see is that the mirror effect. If I do this, that's not bilateral. One added and one abducted. This is not the same thing. This is the same thing. So if you go on one of those like adductor machines and you're seated, that's horizontal. If you're standing, that's regular. I think they're doing pretty well. Let's give them more, just to see what they do. Let's see what happens. Question. All right, guys. What do you think, kneel? We'll do the kneeling one. Is that? Think they're ready for it? We'll see. All right, here's the question. I'm in this position. Start. And I'm going to rotate. I'm going to say my pelvis, but just know that just means the sockets. And I'm going to go from here, where my pelvis is facing the front of the class. And I'm going to do this, where my pelvis is facing the side of the class. I had two significant motions at both of my hips. But we don't assume. We look at the right, and then we look at the left. Notice, my hips are in two different positions. And also notice my knee is flexed, so I can't see my toes. But my femur is still in the same position as if I was here. That makes sense? Start, finish. I'm telling you that both of my sockets on my right and left side move. I'm giving you that information. And what I want to see, with our help, we'll float around. We're not going to answer it. We just want to make sure you're seeing and you're understanding the right questions. From here, my sockets do this. And I want you to tell me what motion, significant motion I had at the right and the left hip separate. Go. My right knee was on the ground. Yeah. You should, if you do it right, you should feel a stretch on the inside of your left hip. Stay there, because after I answer it, I'm assuming we may have some follow-up. Don't assume. We analyze motion joint by joint. My right hip, this may sound weird, but it shouldn't. My right hip is in anatomical position. Not my knee, not my ankle. But I'm not talking about my ankle. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about my hip. Now, my right hip is internally rotated. I had right hip internal rotation. Please, baby Jesus, give me the strength to be able to get up on one leg. Oh. My left hip, because it's in a flex position, internal and external rotation doesn't apply. This would be internal and external rotation, left hip. This would be left hip horizontal abduction. Because from here to there got me to the same places from here to there. Make sense? Emma and Grace will be happy to follow up. If you're like, I don't want to say it out loud, but can you please explain that to me? Emma and Grace are going to take a minute if you need them to clarify. The law offices of Emma and Grace. Now we're getting into the fun stuff. It gets even good because we're going to show how when the sockets move and you don't want to go along for the ride, your trunk has to bend back. Maybe it's like we're going to be getting to a lot more stuff.
Could you say that? For the routines.
Great question.
You wouldn't be able to say when any specific is flexed, you could say when something is flexed.
Say that one more time.
Like, you wouldn't be able to say that if only happened in the knee specific. That's
correct.
Say when something is
You're
flexed.
talking about the knee rotation?
No, horizontal island.
My knees don't have to be flexed.
Yeah, but something has to be flexed for there to be horizontal.
Now I understand your question.
Yes.
And I love it. But just keep in mind, it doesn't necessarily, it has to be either flexed or abducted. Because if I'm here, I can come here. So I don't have to start here. It has to be closer to fetal, whether that's frontal fetal or sagittal fetal, in order to do that.
I see.
I love that question. It's a great question. Sometimes I'm slow. All right, guys, do y'all have one more hard one in you? Okay, we're going to do the rotation. I'm going to give you a hint. What was that? Internal and external, or external?
That's true.
Cool. Now what happens when I move the socket? Okay. So left hip is flexed, right hip is in anatomical. I'm about to move the sockets. The rotation, and this is why it's important, the rotation, the transverse is owned by the femur, not the socket. The ab and the flexion extension is owned by the socket, not the femur. So I start here. I'm going to move my trunk with it, just really accentuate it. But my pelvis or my sockets do this. Feel that stretch? So I started here, and I moved my sockets here. And I want you to be able to tell me the motion at the right hip and left hip, respectively. Go. If you think of my pelvis as like a bucket of water, I poured water out the right side. Right knee. So I did this, and I took my pelvis and I poured water out the right side. You should feel a stretch on the inside of your right hip if you do it right. Right hip should be easier than the left hip. You feel that stretch on the inside of your right hip. You should feel like a stretch on the inside of your right hip. Welcome to KNES 310 Anatomical Yoga. All right, guys, while we're down, stay there, because we'll answer it, and that way you can figure it out. Right hip, abduction. Does it make sense? If you're abducting, you should feel a stretch on the inside. Your adduction. The left hip was hard. If I do this, and I froze, I'm going to do Despicable Me. Freeze, Rick. And I brought the socket and the ball back up to anatomical without moving it at all. External rotation. So this was left hip external rotation. by moving the socket about the ball, which is like the cap and bottle. It looks different. But remember, joint motion is just changing position. It started off in anatomical. I ended in an externally rotated position. So I had to have external rotation. Another way to look at it, I did this. Hey, left hip, how would I have to rotate to go back home? I'd have to internally rotate to line back up. So I had to externally rotate when I left home. Does that make sense? I'm going to give you your money's worth. Follow up? You have a follow-up question? What's that?
Oh, no.
Okay. Right. One more. Because we're on a roll. One more. This one should be easier. Start. I'm going to keep, this is an illusion. My left hip is actually going to stay in anatomical. But it looks like it's going to externally rotate. But both, the socket and, that's like taking a bottle of water and moving the cap and handle the same way. It didn't open or close. I want you to identify the motion at the right hip. Notice though, I'm starting in a flex position. And then I do this. Start. Finish. Start. My pelvis is looking at the floor. Finish. My pelvis is looking to my left. I want you to identify the motion at the right hip. And understand that there's an illusion making it look like the left hip had rotation, but it didn't. Just the motion at the right hip. That'll be our last one of the day. Guys, the reason we're doing or one of the reasons, sometimes when you don't have someone to stretch you, you need the ground to be able to stretch you. You need to be able to keep your feet fixed and move your sockets. And so we need to be able to see those motions that are happening when we do those things. All right, the answer was right hip horizontal abduction. Is it getting fun?
Yeah.
Practice. Rewatch the lectures. Ask us for help and clarification. Okay, that's why we're here. But you can see how if you wait, we still have to do pelvic girdle stuff. We still have to do trunk stuff. All this is working together. I can see how if you wait until the last minute, that's all going to be crazy. Little bites of the apple. All right, guys, y'all have a good one.